Hello students, welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Welcome to a session on economy this week, wherein we'll be taking up some of the very important articles that have appeared in various business related newspapers, and we'll be analyzing these particular articles. For this particular video, the time period that I've chosen is from 1st of April to 7th of April 2019, and the articles that I've chosen are basically from Business Line, Hindu, Business Standard, Indian Express, Live Mint. Let's begin this particular discussion. The first article is related to agriculture exports. Please understand, Government of India has stated that they want to double the income of the farmers by 2022. And to double the income of the farmers, they have implemented a host of reforms. One of the latest reforms that has been announced by Government of India is the agriculture export policy. As of now, please understand, before this particular policy was announced, there was no framework or a single policy to promote agriculture export. Yes, there are multiple policies, but the problem was the volatility of these particular policies. That is, the experts will refer to this kind of an policy as a switch on, switch off policy. That is, as per the economic scenario, that is the current economic scenario, the government would promote export of certain agri products. And whenever there is a problem with respect to that agri product in the domestic market itself, with respect to the supply of it, there is a limitation on the export of these particular products. This is called as a switch on, switch off policy. But Government of India has now stated that they will have one framework of agriculture export policy, under which, very importantly, they want to double the agri exports. Now, when I say they want to double, the agri exports for the financial year 18 was $30 billion, and for financial year 19 it is expected to reach $37 billion. And as per this particular number, or taking this particular number as a base, they want to double the agri exports by financial year 2022 to $60 billion. That is the first and very important point in this particular agriculture export policy. Apart from this, second very important point is they want to diversify the agri exports. As of now, please understand, the exports in the form of meat, marine exports, rice constitute around half of the total agriculture exports from India. I'll repeat the statement. The agri exports, that is meat, marine exports, as well as the rice exports, constitute around half of the total agri exports from India. We want to diversify these particular exports, promote exports of more and more agriculture products. Third, we also want to diversify the markets, that is, to the foreign countries to which we are exporting these particular agriculture products. Because as of now, a country such as UAE attracts around 26% of the total vegetables exported from India, 15% of total fruits exported from India. So what we want to do is diversify the agri exports as well as the markets to which we are exporting these particular products. Apart from this, the fourth very important point is we want to increase the exports of high value agriculture exports as well as the value added agriculture products. That is the fourth point. Fifth point, we want to remove the export restrictions on most of the organic and processed agriculture products. I'll repeat the statement. The fifth and very important point with respect to this agriculture export policy is what? We want to remove these particular export restrictions that we have imposed on organic as well as the processed agriculture products. So under these particular 5 points, we want to double the agriculture exports to $60 billion by financial year 2022. And further, we want to increase it to $100 billion also. And very important point related to this particular policy is the Ministry of Commerce will be the nodal ministry. In simple terms, this particular ministry will oversee the implementation of this particular policy. So these are the most important points related to the agri export policy that was announced by Government of India at the end of year 2018. Now, this particular article discusses one of the very important reforms which has been announced very recently by the government to promote agriculture export, which will aid in achieving these particular objectives. The term that I am speaking is the concept of a transport and marketing assistance. Please remember this particular terminology is TMA, Transport and Marketing Assistance, basically is an announcement done by Government of India to promote agriculture exports. Under this, basically Government of India wants to promote agriculture exports from India to America, that is United States, as well as North American countries. So under this particular TMA, Government of India wants to promote agriculture exports to these particular destinations. By doing what? By providing assistance. Under this particular concept of TMA, Government of India will provide financial assistance to the exporters. And this particular assistance will be provided in the form of the freight and transportation charges which are incurred by these particular exporters. That is, part of the expenditure that is incurred by the exporters in the form of a freight and transportation charges will be reimbursed or will be paid by Government of India, so that the market price of these particular agriculture commodities will come down, the market accessibility will increase, the exports will increase. It will also provide a benefit to the exporters as well as the farmers. So with this particular objective, Government of India has announced the concept called as a transport and marketing assistance. Another very important point you must remember with respect to this particular concept of a TMA is what mode of a transportation will be covered under this. Government of India has clarified that any kind of a transportation through sea routes as well as aviation will be covered under transportation marketing assistance. Apart from this, Government of India has also stated that it will assist or provide assistance for marketing of these particular products in these particular foreign markets. So these are the three very important points with respect to TMA. I'll repeat it again. One, part of the freight or transportation charges will be reimbursed. Second, the sea routes as well as the aviation routes will be covered. And third, the Government of India will also provide assistance for marketing of these particular agriculture exports in these particular markets. So these are some of the very important points related to this concept of a TMA. The next article is related to current account deficit. Now basic concept is there is a balance of payment which will have a current account as well as capital account. Now just be focused on the current account. Within the current account there are components on both the sides, that is expenditure side as well as the revenue side. But more importantly, when I say current account deficit, it basically refers to excess of the expenditure side compared to revenue side. In simple terms, the inflow of dollars in the revenue account is lesser than the outflow of dollars under the expenditure account. As a result of this, there is a deficit created in the current account which is referred to as a current account deficit. In case of India, for majority period of the time, India has been suffering a current account deficit. But please understand, having a current account deficit is not necessarily a negative feature. I'll repeat the statement. Having a current account deficit is not necessarily a negative feature. Why? For a simple reason, India is a developing country and India has got ambition to become a developed economy. Now to transit or to have a transition from developing to developed economy, you need, let's say, raw materials, you need technology, you need goods, you need capital machinery, so on and so forth. But one of the features of Indian economy is what? You do not have a sufficient accessibility or you do not have a sufficient resources available in the domestic market itself. For example, technology itself. For example, capital machinery. In this particular situation, you are forced to import from the rest of the world. And when you are importing from the rest of the world, obviously outflow of dollars would be higher than the inflow of dollars. But please understand, this particular outflow of dollars should be because of the necessary items or necessary materials that you need for having industrialization process. If it is because of unnecessary imports, such as gold, and which leads to current account deficit, this kind of a current account deficit is not preferable. But in case of India, please understand, Though there's a current account deficit, there is a balance of payment surplus. What do you mean by balance of payment surplus? I'll extend this particular table. There is current account and capital account. The sum total of expenditure for both these particular accounts. The sum total of revenues for these particular both of the accounts. If the revenue side is higher than the expenditure side, we'll simply say it's a balance of payment surplus. In case of India, the balance of payment surplus has been there because of a very high amount of inflows under the capital account. For example, foreign institutional investments, foreign direct investments. Both of these have been contributing greatly to the revenue side or the dollar inflow into the Indian economy. As a result of which, we are not only bridging the current account deficit, we also have the BOP surplus. So these are some of the very important basic points that you need to understand. What this particular article discusses is the widening of the current account deficit. Some of the very important facts which have been given in this particular article are, for the third quarter of a fiscal year 19, the current account deficit stood at 2.5% of GDP, which is comparatively lesser when you look at the current account deficit for the second quarter of financial year 19, which was 2.9%. This particular reduction in the current account deficit has happened because of the fall or the lowering of crude oil prices. But please understand, when I look at the overall current account deficit for the financial year 19, that is for the first three quarters, quarter 1, quarter 2 and quarter 3, the fiscal deficit stands at 2.6%, which is much higher compared to 1.8% of GDP for the financial year 18. Now, what are the implications? The implications are this. One, the current account deficit has expanded for the first three quarters in fiscal year 19. Second, since this particular fiscal deficit has come down from second quarter to the third quarter of fiscal year 19, because of a decrease in the fuel prices in the international market, it basically represents the vulnerability of India's current account deficit, which is wholly dependent on the external factors. Now, please understand, the current account deficit has been happening because of various factors, but majority of the times, this particular current account deficit has been happening because of the international crude oil prices, and this particular feature represents the vulnerability of the current account in case of India's BOP. Why? For a simple reason, the fuel prices in the international market are very volatile. Every now and then these particular fuel prices will keep on increasing or decreasing. At one point of time, the fuel prices in the international market hit $120 per barrel, and another point of time they fell down to $39 per barrel. And whenever such kind of a fluctuation is observed in case of the fuel prices in the international market, it will have a direct bearing on the current account deficit in case of India's BOP. This is not considered to be a good feature for any of the balance of payment. Apart from this, this article also states that earlier we basically stated that any current account deficit of anything around 3% of GDP is sustainable or can be controlled. And this was because earlier there was a huge inflow of FDI into Indian market as well as FII into the Indian market. Now this particular trend is not sustainable or has not been sustainable in the recent times. Again, I'm using the term recent times. What this particular article says is FDI for the first three quarters of fiscal year 19 was a net inflow of $25 billion, which for the previous fiscal for the same time period was $24 billion, which basically means that the inflow of FDI is flattening out, which is not considered favorable for India's BOP. And the second issue is FII, foreign institutional investors. In the last couple of months, what we have seen is because of various external factors, rather than FI coming into India, there has been net outflow of FII. The article basically states that the net outflow of FII for this particular fiscal for the first three quarters has been around $12 billion. So look at this. On one side, FDI is flattening out, and second, there is a net outflow of FII rather than having a net inflow of FII. Both of these will have certain restrictions with respect to how much current account deficit can we sustain at this particular period of time. This particular article says that Earlier, we could sustain a CAD of 3%. But because of these two issues, you can basically reduce this particular CAD or sustainable CAD to 2.5%. Apart from this, this article also flags another very important parameter which is affecting CAD, that is the exports. Indian exports in the recent times have got stagnated, and in the coming days, again it is expected that there will be certain impact on the exports because various international agencies have already stated that the global growth in the next couple of years will be flattened or will be much lesser compared to what it was in the previous years. As a result of this will have an impact on India's exports, and the way the US economy is behaving, the way Brexit is happening, the way so many external factors are taking place will have an impact on FDI inflow in India, FI inflow in India, which will have an impact on the balance of payment situation in India. And then this particular article also says that whichever party forms the government after the Lok Sabha elections will have to bring in structural reforms so as to look into this particular expansion of the current account deficit. So these are some of the very important points given in this particular article. The next article is related to 24/7 power for all. This particular article basically states that Government of India in the last couple of months, that is especially in the last 18 months, has provided electricity to 45,000 households every day. And by ensuring this kind of an accessibility to electricity, Government of India has ensured that all the households in India will be covered under electricity. Although some of the households in Chhattisgarh are yet to be covered, after this particular coverage is done, we'll basically state that all the households in India have got accessibility to electricity. Now, this is an achievement for the Government of India. Basically, this article says that at this particular point of time, we need to ask three questions, or three important points have to be raised. What are the 3 points? One, what reforms were undertaken by Government of India to achieve this, that is to provide electricity for all? Second question is electricity connection the end of it, or there is more needed to be done? That is, in simple term, electricity connection is just the beginning. We need to provide energy security. Why it is needed, that is discussed in this particular article. And the third very important point which has been raised is how Government of India can ensure that 24/7 electricity will be provided for all. Let's discuss these particular points. The first, what are the reforms implemented by Government of India which have helped in achieving this particular feat of providing or covering all the households under electricity? The article basically mentions some of the very important reforms such as the implementation of Electricity Act in 2003, implementation of Rajiv Gandhi Vidyutikaran Yojana in 2005. The third very important scheme which has been mentioned is Saubhagya scheme. Now, apart from this, some of the other reforms you must remember are the implementation of IPDS, Integrated Power Development Scheme, the implementation of DDU, GJY, Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Grama Jyoti Yojana, so on and so forth. So these are some of the very important reforms which have been implemented by Government of India in the last couple of years so as to ensure every household will be covered with electricity connection. That is the answer to the first question. Second one, what more is supposed to be done? Though Government of India has ensured that households will be provided with electricity connection, even today there are issues with energy security. Focused on electricity, please understand all the households do not get quality electricity all the time. That is, the voltage variations are one issue which have been raised by various households, and the second one is 24 hours a day electricity is not provided. One of the very important fact which has been quoted in this particular article is the median hours of supply has increased from 12 hours in 2015 to 16 hours a day in 2018. But please understand, despite reaching 16 hours a day of electricity supply, we are still far away from reaching 24/7 electricity supply to these particular households. So yes, electricity connection or covering these particular households with electricity connection is a good step. But this is not the end of the measures or the reforms which are to be taken by the Government of India. Government of India should implement more reforms so as to ensure that every household will be provided with 24 hours of electricity every day. So that is the answer to the second question. The third question is what should be done by Government of India so as to ensure there is a 24/7 electricity supply to these particular households. So the very important reforms which have been recommended in this particular article are: one, it basically says that we must monitor the electricity supply from the consumption end. As of now, what you are doing is basically monitoring the electricity supply from the supply end, but you will have to monitor this from the consumption end. In simple terms, from the consumer end, we will have to start taking the feedback with respect to the quality as well as the quantity of electricity supply that is being done to these particular households. This is important for a simple reason. This kind of a granular monitoring will basically find out what are the issues or the areas where there is a need of certain reforms to be implemented, or where there is a need of certain measures to be taken. And this will go a long way in providing electricity, or to be more precise, quality electricity to these particular households. That is one reform which has been recommended. The second important reform is the DISCOMs will have to start evaluating in terms of what kind of a supply that they need to do. In simple terms, how much electricity do they need to supply to these particular households? The estimation has to be improved. And based on the estimation, they will have to start procuring the electricity from the generation companies. That is the second important reform which has been recommended. The third very important reform which has been recommended is the implementation of smart meters. The Government of India stated that they're looking into the ways of introducing this concept of a smart metering in the electricity sector. And the fourth very important reform that has been recommended is improvement in the customer service. Now, when I say customer service, this article basically says that the way the billing is done, the way the charges collection is done, the way metering is done, all of these kind of services will have to be improved. So these are some of the very important reforms which have been recommended under this particular article. The next article is related to European Union dragging India to WTO over the import duties on ICT products. Now please understand some of the very important points. In the year 1997, there was implementation of one of the very important agreements which is referred as ITA, Information Technology Agreement. Now before this, please remember this, in the Singapore Ministerial Conference which happened in the year 1996, this particular agreement was arrived at, but from 1st July 1997, this particular agreement came into force, and India is one of the signatories of this particular agreement. Now this particular agreement basically states or mandates that the tariffs on information technology products, or in simple terms, the goods which are related to information technology, whenever they are exported from one country to another country, the receiving country or importing country will have to eliminate all the tariffs which are applicable on such goods. I'll repeat the statement. Under this particular concept of information technology agreement, the importing country has to eliminate all the tariffs which are applicable or imposed on the goods under this particular concept of information technology products. India is one of the signatories of this particular agreement. Now, after the Nairobi meet or Nairobi Ministerial Conference happened in the year 2015, there was a second round of ITA which was issued. In simple terms, in ITA 1, which came into force from 1st July 1997, certain products were covered, certain commitments were guaranteed by the member countries. And in ITA 2, furthermore, products have been covered and commitments have been provided by these particular member countries. And ITA 2 has come into force from 2016. So this is a basic background point you need to understand this particular article. Now last year, Government of India imposed tariffs or import duties on ICT products or the electronic goods which are being imported into India. Some of the very important goods which were targeted under this particular tariff structure is mobile telecommunication products. Now, against the imposition of this kind of tariffs, many of the trading partners of India have raised concerns. And very recently, European Union has dragged India to WTO under the dispute settlement mechanism. Now, what will happen under this particular situation? European Union basically has stated that Since India is a party to ITA, it doesn't have any right to impose these kind of import duties. And by imposing these kind of import duties, it is basically going against the provisions of this particular ITA, and we have taken this particular case to WTO dispute resolution mechanism where it will be resolved now. On the side of Indian government, the arguments are simple. One, they are stating that the type of products which have been covered in this particular tariff imposition are not mentioned in ITA 2. And second, they are doing it to protect the domestic manufacturing sector. So this is the argument of Government of India. But having said so, what will happen once this particular dispute has been raised under WTO? Please understand, under WTO, such disputes are basically regulated by dispute resolution guidelines. And under dispute resolution guidelines, the basic process that will be followed will be one country will approach the dispute resolution mechanism and file a complaint against another trading partner. And once such a complaint has been filed, the first step will be to resolve this particular issue through consultations. And that is what has been demanded by European Union now. They want to have consultations with the Indian government whether any solution can be worked out against this particular tariff imposition. If the solution is not obtained or the outcome is not agreeable to either of the parties, basically this particular dispute will be taken up by a body, dispute resolution body. And this particular dispute resolution body will study this particular dispute and give an order. And if India is unhappy with this particular order, or any of these particular two parties is unhappy with this particular order, they will take up this particular issue to the appellate body. And the appellate body will issue the order on this particular subject matter again. Now please understand, as of now, European Union has basically called for consultations. If this particular issue cannot be resolved in the consultation stage, only the next step will be taken where the panel will be set up, which will give the observations or the report to the dispute resolution mechanism. If these particular tariffs are imposed, European Union basically stating that it will affect exports to the tune of 600 million euros worth of products from European Union to Indian market. This is one of the reasons why European Union has approached WTO with respect to these import duties. So these are some of the very important points related to this particular topic. The next article is related to the WTO as well as e-commerce. In the recently concluded World Economic Forum meet, more than 70 countries have come together. That is, in simple terms, the WTO members have come together and they have stated that they'll start the deliberations or the discussions related to the concept of e-commerce or common guidelines under WTO for e-commerce. India has basically stated that it doesn't want to be a party with respect to this particular discussion. India has cited some of the very important reasons because of which they do not want to be involved in these particular negotiations. And please understand, whenever a small number of parties or small number of member countries of a WTO come together to discuss these kind of issues, these are basically called as a plurilateral agreements. That is, once they arrive at an agreement stage and this particular agreement is signed, it is called as a plurilateral agreement. But please understand, plurilateral agreements are not applicable to all the WTO members because WTO basically functions on the concept of a consensus. That is, all the member countries must agree. So more than 70 countries, even including China, have come forward and stated that they want to hold negotiations in relation to e-commerce and come out with an agreement which is applicable to the member countries. India has stated that it will not be party to these particular discussions on the basis of some of the very important points. That is, one, India will be one of the largest generators of data of this kind around the world. And since this particular data is very sensitive, Indian government wants to ensure that this particular data will be stored within India. That is a concept of a data localization which is being discussed now. That is the first point. Second point, India has got huge number of domestic companies in the e-commerce sector itself, and they want to promote these particular domestic companies. That is the second issue. The third reason which has been cited is that India wants to have the leg space or wants to ensure it has got the freedom to formulate the policies related to e-commerce sector as per the requirements of the domestic market. Why this is very important? Because please understand, if an agreement is implemented or comes into force under WTO guidelines, it is applicable equally on all these particular member countries. And if such a policy is implemented, India has to abide by these particular guidelines. Any kind of variation compared to the guidelines, the member countries or the trading partners can simply drag India to WTO. So these are some of the very important reasons why Government of India stayed away from this kind of a plurilateral negotiations which are being conducted for e-commerce sector. Having said so, this particular article makes a case that India should be a party to these kind of negotiations. Why? These are the reasons which have been cited. One, whenever these kind of negotiations are conducted and the agreements are made, India should be able to participate in these particular negotiations, stake its case during the negotiations, and ensure that these guidelines are in favor of or are at least taking into consideration interest of the Indian economy. That is the first reason. Second reason, India is one of the largest growing economies in the world, and we want to increase the value of a GDP to $10 trillion in the next coming years. In order to achieve this particular feat of $10 trillion, one of the very important sector which has been emerging, or the sunrise sector in case of India, has been e-commerce sector. And the e-commerce sector is very important in terms of attracting inflow of dollars, attracting employment generation, attracting latest technology, providing backward linkages as well as forward linkages, so on and so forth. And in order to ensure that there is a stable growth in the e-commerce sector, India should become a party to this particular negotiations which are being held under WTO. Third very important reason which has been cited in this particular article is the MSME sector. Please understand, in case of India, MSME sector is one of the largest driving forces in terms of production, in terms of exports, in terms of the employment generation. And since MSME sector is very important, MSME sector will be very important even in the e-commerce sector because of the supply chain system that will be established in the e-commerce sector. And if Government of India wants to promote the MSME sector, which is very important under the concept of e-commerce now, India should be party to these particular negotiations. So these are some of the very important points which have been laid down in this particular article, stating that India should not shy away from these kind of plurilateral negotiations. India should freely participate in these particular negotiations and ensure that its interests are maintained when the WTO will come out with the guidelines or an agreement. Now let's have a look at some of the important questions. Which of the following are part of the recently announced agriculture export policy? Doubling of agriculture exports, that is to $60 billion by 2022. Yes, correct. Export restrictions on all the agriculture products to be removed? No, this is wrong. Please understand, export restrictions on organic products and processed agriculture products will be lifted. It's not on all the agriculture products. So second statement is wrong. So right option will be option A, only one is true. Consider the following statements. ITA, Information Technology Agreement, came into force from 1st January 1995. No, this is wrong. It came into force from 1st July 1997. So first statement is wrong. Second, India is a signatory country. Yes, it's true. So right option will be option B, only 2 is true. Question number 3, the term TMA, Transfer and Marketing Assistance, appearing in the news is associated with agriculture exports. So these are some of the very important articles as well as the questions related to these particular articles for a period from 1st of April to 7th of April 2019. Thank you. Have a good day.